When the weather warms up, so does the real estate market. Sounds obvious, right? It's true. Spring typically means more home sales. But how will the current interest rates affect people's decisions? What about inventory? Is it high or low? And does that benefit the buyer or the seller? And how do those factors take into account a certain price point or area of the triad? Now it's not so obvious, is it? That's why you should turn to the Ginther Group to make sense of it all. You need someone you can rely on to assess your situation, read the data and trends, and point you in the right direction. Interest rates, inventory, even new construction. There are so many factors that impact our local market. And you should get your information from the folks right here in our backyard. Contact Blake Ginther and the Ginther Group today, 336-283-8689, or visit theginthergroup.com. Buying, selling, investing, or just learning, whatever you need, start now. And like me, you can become a Ginther Group client for life.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.
I'm Algenon Cash, and you're locked in. March is Women's History Month, so I've been intentionally bringing some great women onto the show to talk about all the things that are happening across all industries with women right now. If you happen to miss my last conversation last week, I did have Virginia Summy, who's a historian, a writer, and professor with Salem College. We had a great conversation about some of the things that she's written about, some of the op-eds that she shared, and a lot of her insights. If you happen to miss that show, hopefully you are subscribed to the podcast, or you can catch the video on the YouTube channel as well. This week, I have an old friend, and so I was so excited. This is her inaugural visit, as I like to say, to the Locked In Show. So thankful and grateful to have my good friend Donna King, who I haven't seen since last year, but we go so far way back. I think, Donna, you and I did the E.A. Morris program back in 2012.
Oh,
right?
wow. Was it that long ago? Oh, my gosh.
You know, I was thinking about it this morning, and I always remember the year we did it because Mitt Romney was running for election.
Yes.
And so that was back in 2011, 2012. And we've been able to maintain contact and be friends since then. Recently, over the last couple of years, many people in my audience probably have read some of the op-eds that I've written for the Carolina Journal. And my good friend Donna King is the publisher of the Carolina Journal. So we're going to have a conversation today about her background in journalism and some of the great work that's happening at Carolina Journal. Donna, how are you? Thank you for locking in with me.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you for having me. I'm doing really well. It's funny you mentioned the E.A. Morris. What an amazing program that is. It's a program of the John Locke Foundation that really helps those who are over 25 and not yet 40 really network and learn a lot about a variety of industries. But really, it helps people put a deep thought, some real concerted effort into what they think about when they think about business and the intersection of government policy with business and all those things. Something that with social media, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. So that's what this does. It's funny you mentioned it because my daughter is doing it.
Oh, wow.
Here, I know. So I think I did it the last year I could. She's doing it the first year she can. So we're probably the first parent-child team to do E.A. Morris. It's just an amazing program if you get a chance.
Okay, now I'm going to have to try to one-up you. I'm going to get in touch with Ariana, my daughter, and say she needs to get into the E.A. Morris program.
Oh, for sure.
I think I was 29 when I did the E.A. Morris program, and
Right.
It was certainly an experience that really changed my life, gave me an opportunity to meet so many cool people, including yourself, Donna. John Hood is a regular on the show. My audience definitely knows him, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity to get so close to John had it not been for the E.A. Morris program. But I think anyone, if you are interested in learning more about public policy, leadership, character, how to interact with people that may not always agree with you, this program is for you. And as Donna stated, you can learn more about that through the John Locke Foundation, which is affiliated with the Carolina Journal. So, yes. Donna, you've been up to you're a longtime journalist. You've been in the industry for a very long time. I guess for my audience, let's start there. What inspired you to pursue a journalism career?
You know, I actually went to NC State University, and as part of that, I really enjoyed the creative process of creating content. And at the time, many, many years ago, we didn't know how much it was going to evolve and what creating content really meant. So the idea of creating at the time television and video and all of those things was really where I was interested. It became an art form, but storytelling is really part of that art form. And to me, there was nothing more worth talking about than what's happening in state government, in federal government, about how taxpayer money is being used, how decisions are being made on our behalf, and all of these other things. So to me, that was the story I wanted to tell. So really, it became a part of the desire to share that information and create a record of history. And that was what was really, really interesting and what I became passionate about early on in my career. But I ended up starting off in California working for a lifestyle magazine because that was interesting to me at the time. And then went to Washington, D.C., where I was with the ABC affiliate there called News Channel 8. And I did the morning news, which was insane hours. I think I was doing I had to be at work at 3 a.m. and we were off at noon. So it was nuts. But it wasn't too bad for a young mother because then, you're home with your kids in the afternoon. And then as my kids got older, I was with Reuters and I would do the overnight shift. I had to be at work at 10 p.m. and I got off work at 7 a.m. So nobody ended up having to go to daycare, but it also means that I went probably a decade with no sleep. But it's a fantastic industry and it has changed so much in the time I've been there. Technology has democratized it to a degree where the cost of entry into the field has dropped significantly with the iPhone and everything else we're doing, for the good and the bad. It means there's a lot more voices out there, but it also means that people have to be informed consumers.
I saw a meme from a photographer recently that said, bring back horizontal video. Because things have definitely changed dramatically. One of my first radio jobs, I did the overnight for 94.5. And when you're young and you're in your 20s, you just are so thrilled to be on the radio or on TV or whatever it is you're doing.
Sure.
But now in today's time, I'd find it almost impossible to do that shift. You talk a little bit about how the media landscape is shifting, and you hear
Sure.
so much about content creation now. I mean, whether it's the streaming television shows or the creators that have emerged on Instagram and YouTube, but content is something you hear a lot about. How has this impacted Carolina Journal? How are you adapting with some of these kind of changes that are occurring? And where do you see journalism heading? What direction are we going in?
Sure. I mean, it's certainly a challenge. It means that the news cycle has gone from 24 hours to 2 or 3 hours, and now it's literally minute to minute. News is changing minute to minute because it's out there, and the people who are generating news are the people who are perhaps working for a state lawmaker, or they're a lobbyist, or whatever they're doing. It's not always coming from journalists. And that's something that I think has given journalists a unique responsibility in parsing out who really is an inside story and who is just trying to generate clicks. The Hurricane Helene is a perfect example. The content generation on, for example, Twitter was just literally like a hurricane. I mean, that it felt like a hurricane. And we had a lot of content creators out there who didn't know anything about North Carolina, didn't really have the inside facts. They were confused about where Kings Mountain is, for example, not knowing that it wasn't in Western North Carolina. So it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge because the snowball effect of information because of social media just takes on a life of its own. And people who are in journalism have to say, wait, I'm going to give my readers, my listeners, my viewers the facts and the things that I can verify. I'm not just going to repeat what I'm seeing in social media. So that's where one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing as this evolves. For Carolina Journal, we're facing it just like everybody else. We have to make sure that we have two sources. If somebody's not willing to go on the record, we need multiple of them. We're following by returning to some of those tried and true rules for journalism and for the industry has really been critical, especially now. You can't let that slippery slope take over because then just the organism of the X landscape itself becomes the newsmaker, and you have to be very careful with that. I think where I see it going in the future, the funding model for journalism, for news outlets has just dramatically shifted because of the technology that we're talking about. The cost of entry is low, but you still have salaries. You still have printing. If you do printing, you still have all of the things required. So the business model itself, which used to be you sell an ad in your newspaper, you sell an ad on your radio station, you sell a TV ad, that was how you paid the bills. And that we have an entire generation of folks who aren't used to paying for news. And so how do you make that work? Where I'm seeing it going is more and more nonprofit news outlets, and Carolina Journal being a perfect example. We're a 501c3, which means that we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization. So the risk then becomes, well, then who is paying the bills? Because somebody is, of course. But as long as your news organization explains exactly where you're coming from. Carolina Journal, as you mentioned earlier, is a product of the John Locke Foundation. Which means that we are going to approach the news from a limited government, a small government, high liberty, close watchdog on public policy that helps people self-actualize, achieve achieve autonomy, and to the degree that they're able to, free of government, oppression, high taxation, that kind of thing. So we're very clear on our perspective, and I wish other organizations were. Many are not. Many news organizations are not, even commercial ones that are not nonprofit. So I think that the system is evolving, the industry is evolving, but the pressure is then going to be on news organizations to be very clear on who they are and where they're coming from, and then on consumers of news. Just like what's in your protein shake or the baby food, you need to know what's in the news that you're consuming.
No, I like the way you frame that. I mean, you're nonpartisan, but you clearly have an ideology, and you're very clear about that. Whereas a lot of other media outlets are not as clear about their ideological stance. And I've seen you all embrace technology. I mean, you've got the YouTube show that I've actually been on a few times
Yeah.
called The Debrief. And I see other media outlets having to embrace sort of this media shift.
Sure.
I know here locally, we see our local television shows bringing in content creators now and actually using footage from Instagram on the 6 o'clock news. I actually got a
Sure.
email this morning from a local television show that's getting ready to launch a podcast and asked if I would co-host the podcast. So you do see these media outlets finally embracing the shift that's occurring. I want to get your reaction to this. Even with the new administration in Washington, they've started to invite alternative media outlets to the briefing. I mean, you're more of a traditional news person. How do you feel about
Sure.
podcasters being invited into the White House?
Absolutely. I'm all for it. When I was at Reuters, I had a White House press corps pass. So I've been on both sides of that. I've been in the briefing room. I've had a White House pass. I've had a Capitol Hill pass. And now, as Carolina Journal, we've applied for our pass to get in there and be a part of that new crop of journalists coming in. I think one thing that's important is that just like entrenched bureaucrats, journalists can become entrenched. And I think that that's what you're seeing. There was a scrap, always has been a scrap to get that White House press pass. It means you've made it, that you are a part of it. But what that also means is that you're part of a very small community that often sits too close to each other. And so they end up telling the same story with the same angle, with the same everything. Mixing it up with new folks who know what's happening in their communities, that have a very different base of listener or viewer or reader. I think that is an important point, because the White House Correspondents Group, that's not changing. That group is still going to be there. What they're really doing is adding, not replacing. They're adding some new voices to the room, and I think that's important.
So Donna, like in the age of all this misinformation, I mean, I spend way too much time debunking myths, and I talk a lot about business and the economy, and that's sort of my stick. And whenever I hear people talking about just these things that are not true when we're talking about our economy, especially when we have this debate about tariffs, I
Sure.
spend a lot of time trying to debunking myths. So, do we run some type of a risk when you begin to let podcasters come into the White House for these press briefings? And I guess, how do we balance the journalistic integrity against the expectations of their audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the market shakes itself out, truthfully. If people find that they're getting bad information from somebody, they stop listening. I mean, that's just is what it is. You get a bad meal, you don't go back to that restaurant. I think that the market will shape itself. And by providing some of these podcasters, these content creators with access to good, solid information, which is what I think we're seeing the White House try to do, you can head off a lot of those problems in the beginning. Conspiracies happen in the dark when people don't know. Conspiracy theories happen in the dark when people don't feel like they know. They start filling in the gaps because that's human nature. You try and make sense of a very confusing situation, people will fill in the gaps. And when you put that content out that fills in the gaps or offers a conspiracy, people will grab it because they don't know what else is happening. So I think broad transparency, good access to people with good reputations, and truly the listeners, the readers, and the viewers will sort itself out. If they're getting bad information, they'll turn it off.
It's time to get serious about your financial future. It's never too early, but it could be too late to get started. And that's oftentimes the hardest part, getting started. How much do I save? Where do I invest? Do I save for college or retirement? How much for each? And who do I talk to about it all? Okay, we'll keep things simple for now and help you answer the last one. We recommend you begin with a local financial advisor. And that's Jennifer Johnson of Three Magnolias Financial Advisors. She'll sit down with you for a complimentary introductory consultation and go over all of your questions. Get started on the path to achieving your financial goals. Visit 3magnoliasfinancialadvisors.com or call 336-701-1600. Get comfortable with your financial future. 3 Magnolias Financial Advisors. Retirement, financial planning, and investments.
Securities offered through Private Client Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through 3 Magnolias Financial Advisors. 3 Magnolias Financial Advisors and Private Client Services are not affiliated. Private Client Services is under separate ownership from any other named entity.
Well, I wish y'all luck. I hope to see the Carolina Journal asking a question in the White House. That would be so cool to see you all up there doing that. So I hope that. What is that process like? How do you get approved? Or
Sure. So we covered the campaign pretty thoroughly. North Carolina it felt like ground zero for the 2024 campaign. So we covered it responsibly. We got good comments, good interaction with both campaigns, not as much with the Harris campaign, but certainly with the Trump campaign. And because of that, we were one of many, many, many other outlets that were invited to apply to come in. And I imagine what they're doing is a rotation where folks can come in and they give us time to do it. But I think what we're seeing with this effort is really to get news coverage, firsthand account news coverage to local communities, not making it so beltway based, which is what's been happening for years and years.
Well, Carolina Journal, you all are known for covering the state of North Carolina very well. I do write op-eds for the Carolina Journal. For my audience that have not read any of those op-eds, you can actually go to lockedin.cash. Donna, we now have a link on my website to Carolina Journal, so people can see all of the insight that I've shared with your readers.
Well, thank you.
Oftentimes, the op-ed editor, David Larson, he will slap my hand a little bit when I submit too many pieces that are nationally focused.
Sure.
Carolina Journal really wants to talk about what's happening here in North Carolina, covering Raleigh, the legislature in our backyard. What are some big issues that you're watching this year, Donna?
Absolutely. And because of that, the reason that we do that is, one, that's a market, just like any other business. We have a market that is not saturated. State government news just does not get the attention, particularly outside of Raleigh, that it really should, and that's where people are touched the most by state government, is in the public policy that's made in the Capitol. So the DMV may be your most common touch point with state government and the Postal Service for the federal government, but everybody pays taxes and these decisions are being made on your behalf. So that's why we really focus on state government. There's a few things we're watching right now. Of course, the state legislature is in session. They say they're going to be out by the end of June. We'll see. They rarely hit that deadline. But the few things that we are watching is this at the federal level, the DOGE effort to really identify waste, to improve transparency in state government. So we're watching. There's a lot of bills being filed by Democrats and Republicans, certainly because the issue with NCORE, which is the North Carolina Office of Resilience and Recovery, how poorly that has managed Florence and Matthew hurricane recovery. We want to make sure that doesn't happen to victims of Helene. So we're watching that really closely to see how lawmakers are going to stop it from happening again. and how the Stein administration is going to work with lawmakers to make sure that the roofs are over heads and people are able to really get their businesses back up and running. It's a very difficult process, and it was handled very poorly by NCORE in Matthew and Florence. We want to make sure we head that off. We're also watching Medicaid expansion. We're hearing rumors and some, hard comments that DOGE and the federal government is examining Medicaid expansion money. And, we've only had Medicaid expansion for a year or two, maybe a year and a half. And we passed it. The state legislature passed Medicaid expansion, which added 600,000 people to the largest entitlement program. And it was a 90-10 split. So federal government pays 90, state pays 10. Well, if they rearrange those numbers, Medicaid expansion goes away in North Carolina. And so what are these lawmakers going to do? They promised that we would never exceed 10%. If the federal government starts to change those percentages, North Carolina loses Medicaid expansion, which is a huge hole in our state budget. What are they going to do about this? The same lawmakers that passed it against the advice of groups like the John Locke Foundation are now going to have to figure out what to do when it ends. And how do you kick 600,000 people off the rolls? That's going to be a really difficult situation that's going to be facing our state General Assembly.
That's some interesting news that you just shared. I wasn't aware of that. I knew that there had been some debate or conversation about some cuts to Medicaid coming out of Washington related to all the efforts that DOGE is doing, as well as the tax cut package that they're trying to pass. But I tell you, Senator Kravick, who used to be a regular on the show, and when this whole debate was going on around Medicaid expansion, this was her exact argument. She was afraid to go forward because at some point the federal government could change their mind and North Carolina taxpayers would be on the hook for this. So Donna,
Right.
in a situation like this, what happens? I mean, or do we know yet?
Well, we don't know yet. What we do know is the Medicaid expansion bill that former Governor Cooper, remember, held up. He refused to sign or vetoed budget after budget after budget, which included raises for teachers, raises for public employees, all of those things. He kept vetoing these budgets because they didn't contain Medicaid expansion. So finally, under the Biden administration, there was some sweetener in it, billions of dollars to incentivize North Carolina and the last remaining states to expand Medicaid. Well, now what we're seeing is if they do, this has not been started yet. There's going to be a big process, but there is some talk about changing the 90-10 percentages, right? Our Medicaid expansion law was passed that if 90-10 ever changed, Medicaid expansion ends, which means your choices become change those percentages, stop the automatic end of Medicaid expansion. And that means those lawmakers will be forced to spend, potentially billions of dollars out of North Carolina's coffers to change those percentages, or kick 600,000 people off the Medicaid rolls. Both could be political suicide. So I really don't know what it is. Now, this challenge has not come across their desk just yet. We just sort of see it coming in the distance, that it could happen because there's some talk about it. It's a huge expense for the federal government. And this was, of course, a part of the Obamacare Act was to expand Medicaid expansion. So the Medicaid expansion covers the gap of folks who are able-bodied but not qualified for coverage under traditional Medicaid. They make a little too much, or they don't have a disability. So it's this little slice of people in between those two programs, and it amounts to about 600,000 people in North Carolina.
The quote unquote donut hole that we all heard so much about 10 or 12 years ago. So,
Right.
you mentioned Hurricane Helene.
Sure.
For my audience that knows me, I used to be the CFO for J&S Cafeteria. Our first cafeteria was at River Ridge Marketplace Mall in Asheville. I still meet regularly with our CEO, and I manage their family office, so I'm pretty close to the family. And they are still experiencing,
Sure.
quite a bit of struggle up in Nashville. Now, we don't see it on the news anymore. Not as many people are talking about the hurricane damage and the recovery effort. To be honest with you, I'll admit it started to slip my mind a little bit because we all get so busy and you go back to your normal life, I guess. What is happening in Western North Carolina? And can you give us any kind of update on what the recovery effort is?
Sure. So what we're seeing is the North Carolina General Assembly passing some pretty big spending bills. We're now at $1 billion or more in money going out to Western North Carolina. It was good news that the that I-40 has reopened at least in one direction, going across the state line there into Tennessee. So that was a huge undertaking. We're hearing also, though, from folks who are in some communities that they are getting some relief and getting these roads rebuilt that connects their communities to their businesses, to their shops and stores. So, but the process is going to be very slow. It just is. That's the nature of the terrain, the level of damage, all of those things. And the overwhelming frustration is, I think, with the federal emergency management response. We have a poll out in the field over the weekend that kind of attempts to gauge how people feel about the response and what it would look like, what they would like to see changes. And maybe that's where we need to be. That's the big lesson I think that we're going to see from Helene is what should emergency response be? Does it need to be driven by local communities? Do we need the, bucket brigade type of model where at the end of the day, who came through were the local volunteer firefighters, the local public schools, the local sheriff, the churches. Those are the folks who came together to really be the first responders. So then what do? FEMA is not really intended to be pulling people off of rooftops. Who does that are really going to be local, and then North Carolina National Guard as a backup source to bring in the heavy equipment, the heavy lift. So do we need to reverse what we're seeing in how emergencies are responded to? Do we need to have a much more local focus? FEMA came about in the late 70s, I believe, to be that national coordinator. But does it have too much responsibility? Are they really going to be able to be the first ones on the ground, or should they be empowering, training, funding folks who are a little closer to the crisis? So those are the things that I think that we're going to need to really look at in the months to come about what hurricane response should look like.
I totally agree because the response effort has not been nearly as efficient or effective as it could be in
Sure.
Western North Carolina. I actually have a piece that I wrote for Carolina Journal where I talk about depoliticizing
Yeah.
the disaster response, and that perhaps we need to create some true independent agency that really does get to make decisions without all the political influence, whether it's something happening here in North Carolina or the wildfires that happen in California. It should be that our response is definitely not politicized. And, we're rushing. We should be rushing to help families that have been negatively impacted by any storm or any event that's come in of no fault of their own. I know when the whole effort happened, we put together a box truck. So to your point,
Mhm.
who were the first people that were
Yeah.
responding? The first people that were responding were people right here in North Carolina, and we put
Sure.
together a box truck of food and got it up to Western North Carolina. Obviously, we did a lot of fundraisers in the early days to try to raise money for the effort. But like anything else, I mean, it just has this insidious way of sliding off the radar as you sort of get back to your day-to-day life. We see a lot of news coming out of DC almost like on a daily basis here. I mean, these executive orders, I've completely lost count of them at this point. And my question isn't about the executive orders, Donna, because we could have a whole another episode, several episodes about the executive orders.
Sure.
My question is about how does the average consumer, the average person in this state, how do you go about consuming news right now? And there's so much happening. There's a lot coming out of Washington. There's things that are happening in your own backyard. There's things that are being discussed and debated and approved in Raleigh. There's
Mhm.
things happening all around the world. And you and I, we get paid to keep up with this. And
Sure.
I joke, but I'm sort of serious. I don't know if I would keep up with it to the same degree if I wasn't getting
Oh,
paid to do
completely.
so. So for the average person that has to go to work all day and has three kids and
Mhm.
softball practice and Wednesday night Bible study and Cub Scout meetings on Saturday, how do they keep
Sure.
up with everything that's going on?
I mean, truthfully, you can't, because you and I can't. I mean, there is so much information out there. It comes down to, if you really want to keep up with it, you got to stay active on social media. You have to, I subscribe to a lot of newsletters. And that's one way that the filter is kind of put on it for me. So I pick, 2 or 3 trusted sources. I subscribe to those. I subscribe to groups that are perhaps, in the middle of it, county commissioners and things like that. I think those kind of ways are the way we do it, but I always go straight to the source. If something is really interesting to me, I want to learn more about, for example, an executive order, I go straight to the White House. I don't read the article first. I go straight to the White House's press information and what does that order say? Because the issue that I find is that once you have a report on, let's just say CNN or whatever it is, that report has been filtered through the reporter, the editor, the press release, social media, all of these other things. So I go straight to the source first. I go read the executive order first, then I read the coverage. Now, not everybody can go ahead and do that, and that's always a challenge. But certainly if you have something, I go to the source initially, and then I start reading the news coverage, because the first story you read is going to color, it's going to shape how you perceive it when you finally get to that, click through that link.
Springtime brings so many special occasions, so why not spring into Dewey's for all your celebration needs? From custom, unique cakes to balloons and party tableware to the perfect gift, Dewey's is your one-stop shop in the Triad. Even if you don't have a big event on the horizon, it's always a great day to stop by your local Dewey's Bakery, especially on Mondays for a free Cake Square Day. No purchase necessary and available all year round at any of their Triad area locations in Winston-Salem at Thruway Shopping Center and Renolda Manor, and in Greensboro at the Friendly Shopping Center. Need to place that order now? Visit local.deweys.com, and as a listener of the Triad Podcast Network, you'll receive 25% off by using the code PODCAST. Our friends at Dewey's are always finding great ways to give back to our local community, providing millions of dollars to nonprofits. Your organization can also partner with Dewey's to raise money. Just email cake@deweys.com to learn more. Don't miss the chance to make your event even more special with an order at local.deweys.com. Use the promo code PODCAST for 25% off. Dewey's. Celebrate every day.
And for that person because right now it also feels like, with the exception of the Carolina Journal, there a lot of our local news and even our statewide news is focused on D.C., which means It's so difficult to get information about what's going on in Western North Carolina or what's happening at the local city council meeting. What advice would you give to the person that's just wanting to learn more about what's happening in their own backyard?
Support your local paper. If you still have one, bless them. Support the local paper as much as you can. Subscribe, share things on social media if you can. This is an industry that once it's gone, it will be nearly impossible to replace. Local reporters, even, they're covering local high school sports, whatever it is, it really is critical that we support these local communities and local businesses, because when they're gone, we can't replace them. The only way to replace them is going to be through the social media of, say, for example, the county commissioners. The local paper are really the only ones that are kind of keeping an eye on it. And that's important. I would say that would be my first stop.
I also, sort of wrapping up on Carolina Journal, I also think that there's a misconception of what Carolina Journal really is. And I'm so thankful that at the outset of the conversation, you talked about the difference between partisan versus ideology.
Right.
I was out walking one day on the trail here and came across a good friend. And, she's a little bit more progressive than I am. I'm more on the conservative side. And she was asking me some different questions. And I told her about some pieces that I wrote for Carolina Journal. And she said, no, I don't read the Carolina Journal. And I actually got her number and email and sent her my links. And she ended up becoming a subscriber. She came back to me and said, hey, I decided to subscribe. What do you think is a common misconception of Carolina Journal? What do people not understand about the work you all are doing in Raleigh?
Well, I think that there's a narrative by progressive organizations that Carolina Journal is one conservative or somehow affiliated with the GOP. It's just not true. We have, if I were to look around the room, I would say we have a lot more libertarians working here than we do conservatives. It just is what it is. But that said, they're all good writers. They have a great perspective, and they have a limited government, low tax perspective. That is universal. There are folks on across the political spectrum that have that view. Now, some of that narrative has been shaped by people who are more progressive and are trying to put a label on groups like Carolina Journal or the Locke Foundation. And, people use labels because it's easy. It's lazy, but it's easy. And, once you're able to compartmentalize an organization or a person as being somebody that you disagree with, I'm going to put them in this box over here. It makes it easier to justify your own positions because you don't have to read a wide variety of things. And I try to read a wide variety of things, and I try to talk to folks as often as I can who are, across the spectrum. If for no other reason, I want to know what the narrative is on the other side. But I think it's a little bit of laziness and a little bit of oversimplifying.
Now I know the Carolina Journal is not an arm of the Republican Party, but there are many Republicans that do read the Carolina Journal.
Sure.
And when I go on X or when I go on your Facebook page and I start looking at the comments section of some of the articles that you post, you see these fights sort of break out sometimes between these newer these sort of MAGA Republicans and what I would call myself more of a traditional Republican. How do you all manage that? Because I'm sure you're getting some backlash from the more populist wing of the Republican Party right now.
Well, I think that's just a microcosm of what we're seeing across politics right now. The left is going through it too. I think you got to keep a big tent. I mean, you have to have a spot for everybody if you want to really grow, to really understand policy, to change with the times, or to maintain tried and true policy objectives that have worked over the years and not bend in the wind to trends that history will not be kind to. So I think that we certainly, Carolina Journal is experiencing it. You can see it in real time on our social media. But I do think that what we found is, first, in North Carolina, our polls have shown and results have shown that only Trump can be Trump. Trump is very, very popular in North Carolina, particularly among conservatives, but we're seeing it among unaffiliated. And I think that trend is not going to change. But we also found folks who perhaps tried to emulate some of the strategy that the Trump administration did in the campaign, that Trump had in the campaign, were not as successful. So North Carolina is a fantastic place of informed, engaged people, and that's who we're speaking to, people who are running businesses, raising children, or interested in school choice options. So we're very fortunate to live here, but part of it means that we're going to have disagreements, and being respectful and treating other people in healthy dialogue is a big part of that.
I love how focused and clear you are about the mission. And anytime, and folks, she's not just doing this on the show. Like when we talk off air, offline, when I visit the offices in Raleigh, Donna is always extremely clear about what they're trying to achieve at Carolina Journal. And whether you agree with her or not, that may be another question. That's another debate. But I love the passion, the energy, and the focus and the clarity. I think that makes all the world of a difference. Just a couple more questions for you. I'm going to let you go. You talked about creating a big tent. You talked about listening to both sides. And as I listen to you talk about it, all I can do is reflect on our year in the EA Morris program, which we started out talking about.
Sure.
At the end of the 2024 election cycle, I had John Hood on, who's the president of the John William Polk Foundation and also very instrumental in creating the EA Morris program. And Donna, here's my question. I told John that, they sort of ruined me in the EA Morris program. They taught us that leadership was important, that character is important, that being respectful is important, all the things that you're talking about right now. But Donna, it feels like right now, some of these things are not as important as what we were taught, 12 or 13 years ago. How do you reconcile what we were taught and what's our foundation to what we're seeing in today's time?
Sure. I mean, I think it's just like I tell my teenagers, if you wouldn't say it to someone's face, why would you ever say it on their social media page? And I think that's where people have gotten lost. And we also have to remember, if you look at Twitter, some of these accounts, hundreds of thousands of these accounts, are all run by either bots or by the same people. So it looks like piling on. It looks like vitriol. It looks like, there's a wide swath of folks who are, anti or negative or critical. often those things are all run by the same person, or they're all run by, bots or accounts. Technology has made it look like there's a mob when there's not. And that's something we have to remember, that the face-to-face dialogue, getting an actual person on your show, those kind of things are critical, because the next generation, they know, my 18-year-old, she knows that a lot of this is just artificial. I think that older generations are so used to face-to-face facts that it doesn't occur to us that this isn't a real person behind some of these comments. So I think that will change with the time, as these teenagers become the adults and the voters and whatever, that will change. But I think that's an important point, that what we were taught is still true. You still have respectful dialogue. You still try and understand someone's perspective and put it in context. But when you cut it with your own experiences, you can sometimes get to a better product, and you can sometimes get in the middle. Social media is not reality, and that's something I think more of us need to really embrace.
And so thankful that you and I came up during a time when it wasn't as prevalent.
Right.
Back then we were having a lot of conversations and dialogue face to face, and the entire EA Morris program, that whole year, that's what it's about. It's about teaching you how to have conversations with people that you may not fully agree with. You may have different backgrounds or come from different places, but to be a leader, you have to be able to build that consensus. And I still remember two of my good friends today, like two of my great friends today, Brian Levesque, BJ Murphy. We started out arguing back in 2012, and that had a lot to do with we all had different journeys to get to that place and to start connecting and learning that way. And I think the whole country would be a lot better off if EA Morris programs were required in every high school across the nation.
Sure.
If people were just placed in that position where they really had to learn how to engage and talk to one another. Here's my last question for you. I mean, it is Women's History Month. Women's representation in media leadership is growing, but it still lags behind. So what advice would you give to an aspiring female journalist who's looking to break into leadership like you've done?
Absolutely. I think write and publish as often as you can. Do your own blogs, but stay away from things that are what we would call like traditional opinion posts. So I think that there's a misconception in this younger generation that people want to hear their opinion about everything, then that makes them journalists. It really doesn't. What we're really seeing is there are content creators that are heavily opinion. There are podcasters that are heavily opinion. If you're really interested in news and journalism, pick a beat. Anything, whatever it is you want to do, whatever you're interested in doing, go ahead and do it. I mean, you can get a website made overnight with AI. You can buy a URL, a site name immediately. You can go ahead and start working today. And that's one of the things that when you go to apply for a job and they can find your site full of already written news coverage, they know exactly who you are and what your talents are. But keeping that line between an opinion and actually reporting news, that's really important, because it's a red flag as you enter the workforce. If everything you've got is an opinion blog post, it will turn off real journalistic editors.
I think that's great advice. And, it's so strange when I talk to my friends at local TV now, they say it's so hard to recruit in their business because people don't come up watching the 6 o'clock news any longer. So they don't have this dream of being on the 6 o'clock news. Most people have a dream of being a content creator now, or being a YouTuber or something along those lines. So things are definitely changing. Donna, thank you so much for locking in with me. I've got to get back over to Raleigh soon so I can drop into the debrief and share some insight at some point this year. And to my audience, I appreciate you locking in. Thank you. Make sure you go check out Carolina Journal, not just because I write for them, but they have so many great people that are on staff that are writing about a lot of different topics. So make sure you go check them out. You can subscribe so you can get it directly in your inbox. Make sure you also stay locked in with WTOB, because that's where the Locked In Show broadcasts. Every Sunday morning, you can lock in with me there. But if you happen to miss me there, then hopefully you are subscribed to the podcast. You can get that on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, wherever you like to get your favorite podcasts. You can lock in there. And until next time, as always, stay locked in.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode on the Triad Podcast Network. Our mission is simple: provide information, advice, and stories about the people and places that make the North Carolina Triad such a great place to be. You can find us by searching Triad Podcast Network on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much wherever you like to listen. If you like what you heard and want to support the show and those that contribute, we would truly appreciate a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. It helps spread the word along, as do your shares on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Triad Podcast. To get in touch with us, simply email info@triadpodcast.com. Thanks for listening.
This is the Triad Podcast Network.